All right, welcome to another episode of Talking Ball with Pat Leonard. We have a very special guest today, Dan Wiederer, an award-winning sports writer at the Chicago Tribune. He's the Bears beat writer. He's an enterprise reporter there. He's an on-air analyst at the Score 670, co-host of Odyssey's Take the North podcast, which you can also find on YouTube. Dan Wiederer, thanks for being here, man.
Happy to talk to you, Pat. How's it going?
Going really well. Draft season, obviously, never a dull moment. And I want to talk to you about, obviously, you being in Chicago. Everybody knows the name we're going to bring up. It's Caleb Williams. It's USC. And it's the future of a Bears program that looks like there's some promise on the horizon. First, want to tell the fans about Bet Online. It's down to the last four teams. Bet Online has been your tournament bracket headquarters all March long. And now that we're almost down to the finals, we've still got a lot more in store. MLB is here. NBA, NHL playoffs are around the corner. As always, BetOnline is the number one source for your summer sports wagering. Head to BetOnline today to stay updated on all the action, and remember to use the promo code BELIEVE for your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. BetOnline, the game starts here. All right, Dan, we're getting right into it. Here's where I'm going to start. I'm Joe Shane. You're Ryan Poles, the Chicago Bears general manager. I pick up the phone. I call you. I say, Ryan, I'm Joe Shane. I'm at the 6th overall pick. I'm going to give you the 6th overall pick, next year's first round pick. That could be top 3. We might be very bad. Next year's second round pick and edge rusher Kayvon Thibodeau. And you're going to give me the number 1 pick so I can come up and get Caleb Williams. Ryan, your answer is what?
Talk to you soon, Joe. Not interested right now. I've been searching for the quarterback that's going to rescue Chicago since I got on the job 2+ years ago. I've been gifted the number 1 pick by the Carolina Panthers. I'm taking Caleb Williams. You might want to call the Washington Commanders to see if you can get something at number 2.
Wow. So are you even taking the call if you're Ryan Poles at this juncture? You and I are talking in the first week of April. Is he taking that call now?
I'm not. I've got nowhere to pivot. I mean, obviously the fallback would be to then try to draft a guy at 6 in that given scenario. But now you're talking about potentially getting the 4th best quarterback on the board, if even that, because there may be 4 off the board before we get to number 6. Too dicey. The Bears obviously traded Justin Fields away for pennies on the dollar when the month began, or I guess it was in the middle of March. And so they are fully committed to getting to this marriage with Caleb Williams and then trying to unlock the door to this world that people in Chicago haven't seen for almost 40 years.
Wow. I was even going to try to sweeten the pot on the offer and you shut me down. The phone call already ended. So, well, that tells me where things stand. It's really interesting from the New York perspective because Joe Shane and the Giants at one point, they looked like they might have had the number 1 or number 2 overall pick in this draft. Shane was all over Caleb Williams and USC, going to see him in person in all of his big games. So very interesting now that the Giants have kind of won themselves out of that spot. But you and I are actually talking, I believe, one day after Caleb arrived and visited the Bears. So what can you tell us? What's the skinny on how his visit to Hallis Hall went?
Yeah, so that was the latest and pretty much the final step in what has been a weeks-long getting to know you process between the Bears and Caleb Williams. They fell in love with the player long ago. They understand what's on the tape. They understand what the skill set is. And so really the months of January, February, March, and April were about diving deeper on his personality, figuring out his wiring, trying to figure out the psychology of this young man, to figure out if it's the ideal fit or at least a good enough fit to roll the dice on the skills that he brings to the table. The combine is, very short interactions there. You break the ice, you get to know a guy a little bit. The Bears then went to LA for the pro day in March and spent parts of 3 days with Caleb Williams. First going out to dinner with him and several of his teammates, then visiting on campus and getting to talk ball in the classroom a little bit and getting on the whiteboard and talking through things that way. Then obviously visiting at the pro day. And then the top 30 visit gave them a chance to bring him into their building to get him around some of their players. Caleb Williams did, it's my understanding, go out to eat with some of the Bears players in addition to their brain trust, which would be Ryan Poles, Matt Eberflus, Shane Waldron, their offensive coordinator. Those are the 3 most prominent guys in the picture right now. And so I think this is just a continued process of figuring this all out. Ryan Poles had told me last week at the owners' meetings that for him, the top 30 visit was going to be a good way to test recall with Caleb Williams, to give him a bunch of offensive concepts, to make him absorb them, give him a break, bring him back, and figure out if he could spit out play calls, understand what was being asked of him, and just kind of get that part of the evaluation done in person. But with it also, Ryan has talked all off season about figuring out, can a guy handle pressure, and can a guy handle pressure in this city? And I think it's been very notable that Ryan has said that on multiple occasions,
Hmm.
that he wants to get that feeling that a guy can survive in this world. You talked about being Joe Shane a minute ago. You're in a similar world where this isn't Houston. This isn't Nashville. This isn't some place where you can kind of ease in and figure out the pressure later. The pressure is going to be on you the day you come to your first rookie minicamp practice. And so the Bears have been trying to dial in on that very extensively. And I think they've gotten comfort to the point where it may take 1 or 2 minutes for them to turn in the card on April 25th. And then we'll see how long it takes for Roger Goodell to actually go to the podium and announce it.
I'm glad you brought that up, the idea of playing in Chicago in that market. How can you handle it? Because I saw you tweet something during the owners' meetings that made me raise an eyebrow a little bit. It was about Bears team president Kevin Warren. He was asked about the ongoing assessment of Caleb, and he said, the thing that is most important for me on any of our players, especially potential top draft picks, is, do you love football? Where's your heart? Are you passionate? Do you want to be a champion? Are you willing to do things the right way? Chicago is a very special place. I couldn't tell reading that whether they were convinced Caleb had that or whether he was saying they were still trying to figure that out. How did you interpret that?
Yeah, no, I think they were, if we're using sort of the progress bar, I think they were 3/4 of the way to figuring that out. And
Got
and
it.
I think that they're trying to check those final boxes now to get there. The sentiment I'm sort of picking up on from within the organization is that they believe this kid is wired the right way. They also understand that this is a unique environment on multiple levels. Number one, there hasn't been a star quarterback here ever, really. If you go back to Sid Luckman and Johnny Lujak, and you and I were not alive when they were throwing the football around, so that part of it brings a level of anticipation and expectation that you got to be ready for. The other part of this that's been incredibly interesting, one of the most fascinating off seasons I've ever covered, is there was such an attachment within a chunk of the fan base to Justin Fields that
Hmm.
Caleb Williams was drawing backlash from people that wanted the Bears to keep Fields even before that trade occurred, in a way where you're like, well, wait a second. Like, this is literally a quarterback that people in the league have been drooling over and waiting to get into the draft for years now. The Bears get the opportunity to select him because the Panthers, of what I've described, as basically gave them a gift card with the trade for the number one pick last year. And so, like, you're sitting there in a hypothetical a minute ago giving me all of these things that you would throw in to go get Caleb Williams. The Bears don't have to use any of that. They can use one pick that wasn't even theirs to select a player that people have wanted for a long time. And so you've got that combining to create this level of grand expectation and anticipation here that Caleb's going to have to deal with. You know what
Hmm.
social media is like in 2024. You know what's going to happen if the month of September and October are a little bumpy and there's struggle. People are going to say, hey, he's a bust. They should have kept Justin. It's going to be loud, and you better have the wiring and really the thick skin to be able to take that on. One of Justin Fields' greatest strength was that thick skin. I think the
Hmm.
Bears were really trying to figure out how different is Caleb in that regard, and can he survive when it gets really loud and really nasty in this town?
That's fantastic insight, Dan. Where do we stand on whether Caleb is fully embracing playing in Chicago? Are we past that conversation? Because now this is rewinding a bit, but I remember prior to last season
Yeah.
hearing people telling me directly, like, I heard this kid from USC might try to pick where he plays. And so I know that's been part of the conversation, but are we way past that now?
We are past it. It brings up part of the sub layer of the Caleb Williams conversation that involves his dad, Carl, who's been obviously a talking point around the league now for a while. I believe Carl was quoted in GQ sometime last summer or last fall, sort of indicating that, look, like, we're going to do things our own way, and we're going to try to find a situation that is advantageous to us. Can't fault the father for trying to do that, but this is also the NFL, and you have to understand how the dynamics work. I think that created a perception in our new age world that mushroomed into something more than it ever was. When you separate Caleb versus Carl, I think Caleb just wants to know that he's going to be supported wherever he's going to go. He's been on the record at saying, look, like, I want to play somewhere where there's pressure. I want to play somewhere where there's expectation. I want to play somewhere where people care. Well, Chicago is that place. Now, can you set me up for success? Well, Ryan Poles has basically said that in this weeks long getting to know you process, he said, well, listen, I can put you in a huddle on the first day you're on the job with DJ Moore, who I traded for last year. By the way, in free agency this year, we went out and got DeAndre Swift and Gerald Everett. By the way, shortly after that, we traded for Keenan Allen. We've got Cole Kmet, a rising tight end. Our offensive line is growing. We're going to put players around you so that the ground floor of your arrival in the NFL is pretty nice. And then you can rise up with us there. The question I still have is kind of the coaching infrastructure around him with Matt Eberflus, a defensive-minded coach who has never had a track record of developing a quarterback. Shane Waldron, whose biggest accomplishment to this point is kind of overseeing the breakthrough of Geno Smith in Seattle late in his career, but you're still taking a little bit of a leap of faith there. But I think Caleb understands that the Bears are giving him opportunities to bring out his best. They're going to have his best interest at heart, and that's all you can ask for as a player when you're obviously entering a league into an organization and a team that you don't get to hand select.
Where do the Bears, the fans, stand on the crying in the stands moment for Caleb at USC? Because I know I saw that. And listen, I'm one of those guys, if I'm giving a speech at somebody's wedding, at a family member's wedding, I might tear up a little bit. So, I'll say to myself, hey, that's not a sign of weakness, right? But franchise quarterback, all eyes on you, camera on you, big moment, big market. Where do people see that? Where do people fall in Chicago on that?
So I personally, I'm very eager to talk to Caleb about that. I know the Bears have talked to him about it, and they've gotten a little bit more comfort around it. Now, listen, like we're in a world now where those types of things are going to be magnified times 1,000, maybe by 10,000 in the NFL when you're playing in Chicago. And that, it's one of the things I've talked to Ryan Poles about is this is not just drafting a quarterback number one overall, it's welcoming a spectacle into your orbit. This is going to be a LeBron-like presence in Chicago, where you're not just going to have local interest, you're going to have everyday national interest in every single thing this guy does. And as you know, sometimes little things blow up into something much more than they should be, but they still have blow up to that level, and you've got to deal with that.
Yeah.
As it relates with Caleb, it circles back to me to the emotional maturity question, which I think a lot of evaluators were trying to answer through the pre-draft process, because you have to understand that showing people you care is one thing, but doing it in a way that doesn't become, I don't want to say a distraction because that sounds too negative, but it doesn't become more than it should be is another thing. You've got grown men. You are the hub of energy in that locker room now. You've got guys who are 32 years old with 2 kids and a family, and they don't have time to deal with the things that you're dealing with. And when you're in the quarterback position, the franchise quarterback position for an organization like this at a critical time, you got to figure out how to get your arms around those emotional moments and channel them in the right way. I think the Bears feel like there's some of this that they're still going to have to work with Caleb on, and understand that he did just turn 22 in the fall and that he's still maturing as an adult. And there's other parts of it that are just part of your DNA, and you're going to have to find a way to acclimate, because again, like I don't think crying in the stands after a loss in the NFL is going to resonate real well with a chunk of the 53 guys that you're sharing the locker room with.
And you're so smart, a guy in Chicago saying it would create a LeBron James-like spectacle and not comparing Caleb to Michael Jordan. I noticed that jumped out to me right off the bat. A smart man, Dan.
Well, different eras also, right? Like Michael didn't live in the social media age. Like he didn't have to be subject to all the things that today's high profile stars are subject to. Like you see Caleb Williams through his social media interactions, and you know that he's on. You know that he has liked the tweet in the last 36 hours, which means he's probably been in the For You column and seen some stuff that he probably didn't want to see. We've all experienced that. That's a different world than guys had to live in 20, 30 years ago.
No doubt. No doubt. Last Caleb question before we get on to some more Bears talk. Okay, so you said there's a large chunk of the fan base that interestingly didn't want to let go of Justin Fields, even with Caleb Williams right there. But now that the hype is, running its course towards the draft and towards the number 1 pick, and people know now this guy's the future of the franchise, the Bears believe in him, he believes in them. Is it possible that fan expectations will get too high for him and they will hear the Mahomes comparisons, and that this guy is, there's almost nothing he'll be able to do to fully live up to the build up to this pick? Because we really haven't. I mean, like we've seen some wire to wire guys like a Trevor Lawrence, for example, a guy who it's like, oh yeah, this guy's gonna be number 1 pick like 2 years ahead, and it's him. But this buildup for Caleb has really been something. So are fan expectations too high in Chicago, or could
Well,
they be?
there's two ways I can answer this. Number one is that they already are in certain pockets. There are people that see the Mahomes comps. There are people that see what CJ Stroud did as a rookie, and they're expecting Caleb because of the hype and the way people in the league have talked about him for years now, that believe that anything less than the best rookie season in NFL quarterbacking history is a disappointment.
Right.
Okay, right? Like, so that bar is set really high. Now, I flipped that on its ear quickly by telling you that the Chicago Bears are the only franchise in NFL history that have never had a 4,000-yard passer. The Chicago Bears still have never had a quarterback throw for 30 touchdowns in a season. So the bar that Caleb Williams has to clear is pretty low. So while people are vocalizing these grand expectations, we saw what happened with Justin Fields. He intoxicated people with his playmaking ability. Justin promised going into last season that he was going to become the first quarterback to ever throw for 4,000 yards in a season for the Chicago Bears, and he didn't pass 2,000 yards until Christmas Eve. And yet
Oh,
there were still people that fed off the playmaking brilliance and the fireworks shows and the things that made you get that adrenaline rush and said, man, love this guy. Want him to be our forever quarterback. So I don't think it's going to take long once people watch Caleb play to
right.
understand that even if the production and the early success isn't where the highest of high bars is set, that you're going to see something that goes, okay, yeah, I'm cool subscribing to this. I'll give you one quick anecdote here.
Yeah.
Ryan
Okay.
Poles talked about breaking the news to his fifth grade son, Mason, that they were trading Justin Fields. Mason has a relationship with Justin Fields. He has Justin Fields' signed #1 jersey on his bedroom wall. He went as Justin Fields for Halloween last fall. So you talk
Oh,
about having to break it to one specific Chicago Bears fan that, hey, we're pivoting off here. And I said to Ryan, I said, after you explained all the business is business, NFL jargony lingo stuff to him, did you just do the fifth grade thing and send him down to YouTube and say, search Caleb Williams highlights? And he said, I did. And now Caleb is the lock screen on his phone. So that,
oh,
I think, is a nice little snapshot of what's going to happen here in Chicago, where people suddenly get a taste of that and go, okay, we're cool. Good luck to Justin in Pittsburgh. Let's ride.
great anecdote and good move by Poles pivoting quickly there to YouTube. You and he like minds. All right.
Right.
So the Bears, of course, because like you said, they got that gift card from the Carolina Panthers. They also have the 9th overall pick. And I saw, this week as we talk, Rome Odunze, the receiver from Washington's coming in and visiting. Alabama outside linebacker Dallas Turner, Tyler Guyton, the offensive tackle from Oklahoma. You don't have to zero in on a specific player, but which position do you think the Bears most likely go in that spot? Or is it really dependent on how everything falls ahead of them?
It's an amazing luxury that they have this year, having the #9 pick in this draft, where you're taking your own quarterback at 1 and you're expecting a bunch of other quarterbacks to come off the board, because that means the other positions aren't getting picked away at before the board gets to you. The Bears are going to have tremendous flexibility at 9 to do what they want. I think ideally Ryan Poles would love, because of the talent pool that's going to be available to them at 9, would love to trade back if he could find a partner in the Raiders or the Vikings or maybe the Broncos. You move back a few slots, you get another pick for later in the draft, and you still have a group of players that you feel comfortable with. Matt Eberflus, their coach, said something at the owners meeting that stuck with me. He said, look, for me, it's about affecting the quarterback or helping the quarterback. So that leads you to believe that you're going to be looking at pass rush, or you're going to be looking at an offensive lineman or a weapon, a wide receiver or a tight end that can help you there. Well, look, you can go through the menu, Pat. I know you've studied the draft being at #6 to know that, like, you're going to have a bunch of really good offensive tackles still available to you
I was just going
at
to say that.
#9.
Yep. You took
You're going to
yeah. Yep.
potentially have a really good receiver, whether it's a Dunze, assuming that Harrison and Neighbors are off the board. You're going to have the opportunity to maybe talk in the room about, do we want to go with Brock Bowers here and add a tight end that can be a weapon here? You're going to have the opportunity to talk about pass rushers, whether it's Jared Verse or Latu or Dallas Turner. Like, I'm telling you, that menu to pick off at #9 is going to be incredible for the Bears this year. What's been fascinating in Chicago is, in most years before this one, we would have spent the last 3.5 months talking about this #9 pick, because of everything going on with the quarterback position. And, oh, by the way, a new stadium that they're trying to figure out.
Right.
We're just now getting to the conversation about the #9 pick in the first stage of April. And I think people are going, whoa, like, this is going to be a potentially franchise changing pick, even though we've spent all our time talking about Caleb Williams and the quarterback situation and everything that's gone with that.
The number 9 pick, a footnote in the Chicago Bears
Right.
conversation. You mentioned the stadium real quick. Where does that stand, that whole situation?
Yeah. So the Bears purchased 326 acres of land on the old Arlington Park racecourse property in the suburbs of Chicago. But they've since pivoted off, with team president Kevin Warren talking extensively about a vision to build on the lakefront where they currently play, just south of where Soldier Field currently exists. I would expect by the middle of this month for the Bears to have a flashy news conference with renderings and videos and a brochure
Mm.
and a pitch to people to say this is why our new stadium, our new domed mega stadium can be right here where this old piece of garbage has been for the last 20 plus years or whatever it is. And so we're going to see whether that's part of negotiation ploy to try to get more of what they want out in the suburbs. It doesn't feel like that coming out of the owners' meetings, not only talking to Bears representatives, but people on the stadium committee and others around the league. It feels like they are pushing hard to try to figure something out that would allow them to build a sports megaplex, an entertainment megaplex, really, right there on Soldier Field. I know you've been in that building before. You understand
I do.
how beautiful it can be, right? Like when you look out and you see the skyline above your stadium.
Oh,
I
yeah.
think that's something that they're interested in exploring, and that's the road they're on right now.
Well, selfishly, I love traveling there. I stay at the Blackstone right on the park, walk to the game on Sundays. I mean, it doesn't get better than the city of Chicago. So that's my vote, but I know that doesn't count. So going back to the Bears and really the big picture of this rebuild. So Ryan Poles and Matt Eberflus, they're 10-24 in their 2 seasons,
Yeah.
and they went 7-10 last year. Now here in New York, Joe Shane and Brian Daboll, they're 15-18-1 with a playoff win, but they went 6-11 last year. Both teams look like they could take quarterbacks in the top 6. Which rebuild do you prefer to be a part of? Which team would you want to be in this scenario?
I, I'm going to say the Bears just because this is a quarterback-driven league, and I think they have the opportunity now to unlock something at the position that they've never experienced before. It just feels like if Caleb Williams is even 3/4 of what everyone has billed him to be, you're opening up a window of opportunity here that you haven't had in a long time. Pat, the last time the Chicago Bears had three consecutive winning seasons was in the late 80s. 1988 was the last time they had 3 consecutive winning seasons. They haven't won a playoff game since I started covering the team in 2013. There is a level of mediocrity here that is almost unmatched league wide. And I think by getting that quarterback position right, you're able to do some things that even in the down years, look, like Patrick Mahomes just went through his panic year and they won the Super Bowl. Like you in New York, people understand that like a couple of those Super Bowl wins with Eli Manning were in years where like in early December, people were like, we need to fire the coaches and start over.
That's
And
right.
then the next thing you know, they're on a platform with confetti falling on them. And so that's what happens when you get the quarterback position right. Not knowing what is going to wind up with New York in the quarterback position, I don't feel comfortable picking that over what I know could be a paradise with Caleb Williams starting for the Bears.
No, I agree with you. I think really it might turn out that Ryan Poles trade with the Carolina Panthers could end up being one of the best trades in NFL history if Caleb Williams ends up fulfilling the promise that he has. But certainly, at the very least, turning the Bears franchise around. By the way, I agree with you. The Bears scored 360 points last year, even though they traded that quarterback. The Giants scored
Oh,
266.
wow. Wow.
So
Wow. Wow.
you're throwing all the best stats around. There's one I had ready for you.
I've lived through some of those seasons. Those are not fun.
Oh man, oh man, yeah, you don't know where the points are going to come from every Sunday. All right, so regarding Poles, the general manager, curious, has he already earned the confidence of the fan base after fleecing the Panthers, and where he's positioned them now, or are the fans still in wait and see mode with Ryan leading the Bears organization?
My advice to Bears fans with everything and every person is to always be in wait and see mode. This franchise has not earned your confidence
Mm.
until they win on a regular basis. That said, I think Ryan has done a really nice job in 2+ years and now 3 off-season cycles of getting the roster where he wants it. When GMs come in, you experienced it on the same timeline as I did, that they want to tear down some things so that they can build up in a way that they want to build up. And sometimes that means subtracting players that are really good players for you, but don't necessarily fit the grand vision. Roquan Smith, a primary example here, where that move was not well received when it happened, a midseason trade in
Mm.
2022, where you're getting rid of a top 10 pick who actually materialized into what you thought he was going to be. And then you're saying, okay, we're subtracting him. We're getting rid of him. At the same time, you make a trade where you give up your second round pick, which ended up being number 32 overall, to acquire Chase Claypool, who's going to be out of the league here. Not now that
Brutal.
he hasn't been signed in free agency. There have been some bumps in the road for Ryan Poles where you go, yikes. But that trade with the Panthers, some of the things he's done in the draft, his ability to kind of stabilize this roster in key areas has given the Bears a chance here. Now, if you get a chance to have a chance at the quarterback position, now you go up a level. I think they still need a little bit of help on defense. You need to have a little bit better depth and supporting cast on offense. But it sure looks like the chance to compete for the next 5+ years is coming. And so through that lens, I think people here are optimistic, maybe a little bit more than cautiously optimistic, and they feel like Ryan Poles has done a nice job of getting them ready for what should be a runway here.
I like watching the Bears closely because they're on that same timeline as the Giants. And the Giants, obviously, Ryan Poles was one of the 3 finalists for the job before they hired Joe Shane. So it's fascinating for me to see if Poles ended up in the right spot. Did Shane end up in the right spot? And it's also interesting, and this is something that people around the league, I think, universally agree with right now, is that the Giants kind of screwed themselves in their rebuild by winning a little bit in year one. The Bears, kind of the bottom is still falling out in year one, but they end up with that number 1 pick that they then ship for that haul to Carolina. The Giants end up in this middle ground and end up paying Daniel Jones
Right.
off of a playoff appearance and victory that could have been a lot of good fortune and smoke and mirrors and just good immediate coaching. So it's really fascinating to see how that immediate success may not turn into the better rebuild overall. Um, is there pressure on Eberflus this year as the head coach? Because, maybe Poles trade ends up positioning them well. But, Matt Eberflus as the defensive coach, like you said, you bring in a quarterback. Is he going to develop that? Do you think there's pressure on him, or do you think this is more like a long-term patience package deal with the coach and GM?
I wish I had a better answer to this because it's something I've been trying to feel out. The last thing you want when you're drafting a quarterback number 1 overall is to have your head coach having win or else pressure, which may change the way you develop a guy, which may change the way you make in-game decisions, which may change the entire dynamic of what you're trying to do. I expressed to Ryan Poles at the owners' meetings last week that's one of Chicago's grandest fears. They drafted Mitch Trubisky in 2017 and fired his head coach 8 months later. Justin Fields comes in as a rookie under Matt Nagy. The next year, he's being introduced to a whole new offense and a whole new coaching staff. This has been a track record of draft a quarterback high, blow it up, and make him restart in year 2. That's the last thing you can afford with Caleb Williams. Now, the ability to allay those fears is really sort of this request to take a leap of faith that Matt Eberflus is going to lead this team in the right direction, that his ability to overhaul his offensive staff after firing Luke Getsy in January has positioned the quarterback to have success. But I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen here. And Matt Eberflus was seemingly on the hot seat for all of last season. The Bears started 0-4, had incredible dysfunction and drama in their building in the early goings. They righted themselves late in the year and won a bunch of games that made you feel better. But it wasn't enough for them to say, yeah, Matt Eberflus is 100% our coach in 2024. They spent several days after the season ended internally discussing which direction they should go. If that's the case, you would have to feel like there would be some not ultimatums, but expectations in 2024 that you'd have to meet to retain your job. At the same time, I don't know if you can afford to do that because you're subjecting your young quarterback to the prospect of having to restart in his second season, which is 100% the thing they shouldn't have done. So I'm going to ask you a couple questions on this topic because
Let's
number
go.
one, like personally, I would have, if I were sitting in that building and making that decision at the end of this last season, I would have taken the clean break and figured out how to bring in an offensive minded coach to be on the same timeline with the rookie quarterback you're bringing in. It just feels healthier. But when you talk about being on the same timelines, I was a big advocate of the Bears significantly exploring the possibility of not uniting with Brian Dable in 22 because I thought his work with Josh Allen made him a prime candidate to come in and put his fingerprints all over Justin Fields. So I'm just curious how you kind of assess all that from your lens, having had a couple years with Brian to understand what he does and what he could have been here.
That's a good question. I think, well, Dable's under a lot of pressure right now because he has to answer the question right now, Dan. Like, he won Coach of the Year in 2022 as a rookie coach with the Giants, and in large part because it looked like he had unlocked a lot about Daniel Jones that hadn't been previously. And he employed his strengths. He hid the weaknesses of not just the quarterback, but of the team. But last year's lack of assembly of a competent offense, a competent offensive line, poor quarterback play, a severe regression, it made everybody take a step back and say, well, was it Daboll or is Josh Allen just amazing? Right?
Right.
Like, you know, he had the reputation and developed the reputation as a really good offensive mind and as a quarterback whisperer in Buffalo. But if you go through his trajectory and his history, you know, Cleveland, New England, you know, and et cetera, Buffalo, New York, really outside of Allen, who clearly is a supreme talent, there's no other example of Daboll, you know, taking lemons and making lemonade. And so I'm not sure if he would have turned Justin Fields into something else. I do agree, though, with the premise of if you need to get the quarterback right and it's not right, I think in the modern NFL, going offense is the way to go as far as the head coaching position is, you know, is concerned, especially because you're setting the course for not only what your organization looks like, but what your offense looks like. If you're shopping that out or you don't know enough to step into the room and tell people what you need and what you need to see and how things need to adapt week to week, then I think that's a weakness in the organization. Now, the final point I would say is Daboll came in with Joe Shane, and they came in as, you know, two
Right.
guys aligned from Buffalo. Now, it still profiles that way, but Daboll's second season in New York was marked by a ton of dysfunction, particularly with how he dealt with his coaching staff. You talk about Caleb Williams and players and can they handle a big market. Brian Daboll has at times crumbled under the pressure and the weight of being on the sideline in a close game in New York with a losing team, and the Giants need to turn it around. And he has treated coaches poorly on the sidelines, and it has resulted in, you know, a revolt and an exodus of sorts from people from their coaching staff. And so, you know, I think that would have probably gone just as well in Chicago as it went in New York, and that is very badly. So I think overall, would Daboll have cured everything and kept things on the straight and narrow versus Eberflus last year in Chicago if he had been the coach? Like, I'm not so sure because as you can speak better to this, but I mean, Eberflus did get his defense, the thing he knows best, to play very well. And it wasn't like it was absent of any signs of progress on the roster. But I think it's fascinating. I almost think, Dan, like when you and I are closer to the specific team, it's so easy to poke holes in here's
Yeah,
where they failed, right?
for sure.
Yeah.
And you know, you mentioned the coach of the year thing, which gives me flashbacks because Matt Nagy came in his first season in Chicago and won coach of the year. And then it turned out that it really wasn't Matt Nagy that had, you know, positioned the Bears to have long-term success. They never built off that division championship season in 2018, and he was fired after the 2021 season ended. And so you're always reminded in the NFL that premature celebration is a dangerous thing, right? Like to proclaim a rival is always something that you want to just say, okay, hold on, pump the brakes here. Let's make sure, let's see it again. And then after we see it again, let's see it again and again. And then we can proclaim a guy as the savior or the, you know, the pinpoint leader of a turnaround or whatever it may be. Too many experiences at those premier positions, coach, quarterback, coordinator, to realize that you better prove it over and over again. Otherwise, you're going to be looking for work. And you've experienced that in similar ways as I have.
No, well said. Well said. One other kind of analogous situation with the Giants and the Bears right now is the Giants just made a big trade for Brian Burns, a pass rusher from the Carolina Panthers. They gave up a 2 and a 5, and they did a 5th round pick swap, and they gave him $28.2 million a year. That is the second highest paid edge rusher now in the league, behind Bosa, on a massive contract extension. Now the Bears just traded a 2 during last season for Montez Sweat. They give him 24 and a half a year on an extension. Just curious from your vantage point, covering a rebuilding team that made a big trade for a pass rusher is already established. How much of a difference do you think that Sweat made on the Bears and will make? And, how much of a difference can that pass rusher and that player make on a team where these two teams stand?
Yeah, it's huge. And the Sweat acquisition went far better than I would have forecasted when they made the trade.
Mm,
You make that trade in midseason, you're kind of doing it out of desperation in order to give your defense a chance to show that it can rise. And you're saying, well, wait a second, you not only are you giving up draft capital, but now you're going to have to pay him top dollar because you've traded for him. You can't trade him for him and then have a 9-week rental for a team that's rebuilding. And so they get through all that, and you watch the production statistically. If you look at all of the Bears metrics before the Sweat trade and after the Sweat trade, it was arrow up and arrow sharply up. And so
mm.
he did really live up to that multiplier billing up front, where his play created opportunities for others. Jalen Johnson ends up having his a second team all pro season at the cornerback position because the ball's coming out and he's able to get more production in the
Aha.
secondary on passes that are coming his way. You see other guys up front. Justin Jones's sack production at the defensive tackle position suddenly spiked when Montez Sweat arrived after a year and a half of just like, why are they paying Justin Jones anything? And so, man, they really feel like they hit the jackpot there. And I applaud Ryan for having foresight. It doesn't always work, as evidenced by the Claypool trade the previous year. But when you're looking at your big picture and you're looking at your big picture daily and saying, okay, well, we're going to need an edge rusher. Are we waiting for free agency? Are we waiting for next year's draft? Or do we want to take the dice roll now and get a guy that we know is better than the type of quality that's going to be available on the shelf when we get to the free agency and the draft? And so that was a bold move he made in the middle of last season, clearly paid dividends. And I think the Bears feel really strongly that for the remainder of that huge contract that you referenced, that Montez Sweat will be a difference maker here. And that's a huge thing to have on your defense, particularly from a guy who can rush the passer.
Well, maybe an encouraging sign for the Giants and Burns. I agree. I like that Poles keeps swinging and doesn't let, let's say, one that turns out it was a mistake
Right.
prevent him doing the next deal. All right, one more, and then we'll get you out of here. I know your time is valuable, especially right now. All eyes on Chicago. So Bears draft Caleb Williams, number one. The over-under win total early on, like right out of the gate on all the sports betting sites, was 8.5.
Yeah.
So the Lions, we know that they are a team that has ascended, may continue to ascend. The Packers are a team who's suddenly back in the mix and looks very strong. What is a realistic expectation for the Bears this year? And ultimately, would you pick them to go over or under 8.5 wins this year?
Yeah, that's a perfectly set win total, to be honest with you. I right now, as we sit here on April 4th, I would say I'm picking them to be a 9-8 football team this next year. So that would be over by the skin of their teeth. So look, like, I think managing expectations is going to be a big part of what Ryan Poles and Matt Eberflus have to do in 2024. I've been trying to say for a few months here that Caleb Williams could have a really, really promising and encouraging rookie season and the Bears missed the playoffs. That's okay, as long as you're seeing flashes that you got it right at that position, and then that window opens the following year and then you keep it open. I've described Caleb as like the steel bar that you stick in the window so that it doesn't close, and hopefully he becomes that, even if it doesn't get all the way open in his rookie season. I like, the division is tough. The Lions don't seem like they're going anywhere. I feel like Jordan Love in Green Bay is one of these guys that I want to see it again before I truly believe it. I think there's been a little bit of celebration in Green Bay that, like, we got another one, and it's like, okay, well, wait a second, let me see it for multiple seasons before I think that he's going to approach anything near the Rodgers Favre level.
I love it. We got some Chicago, Green Bay trash talk in. I love it.
And so, like, and the Vikings are obviously in their own realm right now, trying to figure out what to do at the quarterback position, and we'll figure out where they go.
Yeah.
But 9 feels like a good bar, a good target for these Bears. So that's where I'd be right now. And maybe as we get closer to the season and the schedule materializes in a way where you see the ebbs and flows of it, maybe I'd change my mind.
Dan, this has been a fantastic episode and podcast. I'm excited to see Caleb in the Bears uni.
Yeah.
Remember, everybody, we are sponsored by Bet Online, also by Estate 98 Coffee. It's an Essencia Day Cafe from El Salvador, dates back to 1798, takes 3 seconds to make. Drink it all the time when I'm doing the Talking Ball podcast. He is Dan Wiederer of the Chicago Tribune, the Score 670, and Odyssey's Take the North podcast. Dan, this has been awesome. Thank you so much.
Awesome talking to you. Because you're sponsored by Bet Online, I'm going to give you one fun annual Dan Wiederer wager to place. First semifinal of the Final Four, first half under. Get on it this weekend. Have fun.
First half under. Man, I'm making money while hosting a podcast right now. Appreciate you, Dan. Talk soon.
Thanks, Pat.